Hello, and welcome back to Choices, Chapter 6. Before we get going, I wanted to congratulate you on making it to your third class, which shows you've been able to watch these videos, read the chapters, and answer the questions successfully, demonstrating your knowledge of the material. Congratulations on making it this far. Hopefully, you found that it's not as horrible as you thought it would be. So today we're going to continue the discussion about the relationship between thoughts and behavior and learn a new skill that can be used to further prevent stepping out of the box. So in chapter 6, Dr. Adams spends some significant time talking about characteristics of people that he sees in his treatment program, which is pretty similar to what we see also in FAP. He's been able to identify 3 common characteristics that the vast majority of his clients have at the moment they step out of the box and engage in abusive behavior. So he says that most people he works with have one or all 3 of these characteristics. The first is the idea of responsibility. And in this situation, he's referring to responsibility as at the moment someone decides to step out of the box and engage in abusive behavior, they are able to successfully tell themselves that what they are about to do is not their fault and was caused by someone else. This rationalization allows them to engage in abusive behavior and alleviate any sense of guilt, just the idea of knowingly doing something wrong. If you can convince yourself that what you're about to do is the fault of someone else, there's no guilt. This next characteristic is a comfort with abuse, which means that under the right conditions, stressful conditions, when someone is triggered, their natural go-to, almost as a reflex, is to engage physically. Comfort with abuse often implies that someone has been in abusive relationships before, even going further back, that they, as children, were exposed to domestic violence or some form of abuse themselves. So if you reflect back on that anger inventory that you did, and which asks about abuse growing up, about the way anger was modeled by parents, about how you handled anger growing up, you start to see some of that comfort with violence if it was present throughout somebody's lifetime. The third characteristic is power and control, which essentially means that someone is willing to use whatever power they have, whether that's a physical power and aggression, verbal or emotional aggression, against their partner in order to get them to do what they want them to do and maintain control over the situation. So although all 3 of these characteristics are extremely common in a situation where someone steps out of the box, they are not fixed characteristics, which means that if someone decided to make a change and do something differently, they are able to not revert back to the same patterns and use these 3 characteristics in future situations. So today we're going to talk about a skill, a strategy that you can use to overcome what may be natural, what may be even reflexive in these situations. The skill is called doing the opposite. So before I tell you about this skill, I want to remind you about a test-taking strategy that you may have heard in high school, maybe prepping for SATs or maybe advancement exams. The test-taking strategy is when you look at a question, go with your first answer. If you think instinctively that the answer is B, it's most likely B. Don't go back later and second guess yourself and change your answer. Your first answer is most likely correct. We find in these situations, conflict situations, relationship situations, when a fight, flight, or freeze response is triggered, there's emotional flooding, when there may be a primal panic and a deep-rooted fear of losing an attachment figure, the first response in this kind of situation most likely is the wrong response, the least favorable response to get the desired outcome, which kind of makes sense because under the influence of stress chemicals and that fight, flight, or freeze impulse, we are likely to do things reactively that are disproportionate to the situation and based on an emotional response, a survival response, and not a critically thought out logical response. So unlike what you may have heard as a test-taking strategy, this idea says that whatever your first response is, your most instinctive response in the moment, try to do something very, very different. Do the opposite. The way this strategy works is, first of all, to recognize that you're in one of these crisis type situations. You're being emotionally flooded. This response is taking place. You can recognize these situations by your warning signs. We've already discussed paying attention to your thoughts, what's going through your mind in that moment. Does it seem disproportionate, exaggerated, too intense for the situation? Are you noticing those physical reactions tell you that your body is being flooded and preparing to fight or flight? Feeling that elevated heart rate? Are you getting sweaty, jaw clenched? Do you feel that agitation pumping through you? Those are the physical cues. And lastly, the feelings. You feel the anger, the rage, shock, those intense emotions that help to tell you you are reacting not just to the situation, but to what your body is telling you that this could potentially be a dangerous situation, whether or not it really is. The next step is to make a conscious decision to choose, is the key word, to choose an opposite reaction. Knowing that your first instinct is likely the least desired response, go in a completely different direction and choose the opposite. Let's take a look at a couple of scenarios that help to demonstrate this idea of doing the opposite. In our first scenario, we have Mark. Mark is coming home after a long, hard day. He was held late. He's getting back as quickly as he can to his wife and their newborn baby. He's eager to see them and to start his evening. What he does not expect is that he's greeted at the door by his wife, who is furious that he's late and that he didn't call. So with newborn baby in hand, she greets him at the door. He opens the door, and it's just like opening an oven at 450 degrees. He's just hit by her launching into him about being late. You ever had that kind of a welcome? His thoughts are, I work my ass off all day and have to come home to this. I warned her about doing this when I came home. She asked for it. Let's see how she likes it. By that third thought right here, she asked for it. Mark is demonstrating this responsibility characteristic. What he's saying to himself is that whatever he's about to do is not his fault. It is her fault and caused by her actions. His physical reactions, his heart is racing, his teeth are clenched, he's feeling anger. And if he goes with this instinctive response, actually attributing responsibility to his wife, what is he likely to do? Give it back to her. Yell and scream and see how she likes it. Well, let's say Mark doesn't want to do this, and he was able to catch some of the thoughts that were racing through his head in that split second. Maybe he was able to take just a few seconds, just a few second delay before he reacted. Maybe in those few seconds, instead of opening his mouth and yelling back, he took a look at his baby son and thought about what he was going to do in front of him, how that might affect him. Maybe he thought about the kind of night that he wants to have, especially after the day that he just experienced at work. Maybe he decides to do something different. So here, we're going to see him catch himself. The same initial thoughts came to him, but he was able to pay attention, recognize what was happening, and take just a few seconds. In this few seconds, here comes some different thinking. First is he's thinking, well, she shouldn't yell at me like that. Now he's saying, well, she's tired. She's been home with the baby all day. She's probably up all night. Probably pretty frustrating, expecting him to be here at 4:30 and he's not home. Maybe she's just really tired. Next, he's thinking, I don't want the night to go like this. He knows exactly where this is headed if he responds instinctively. So physically, his heart is still beating fast, but it's starting to calm down. Here's where you see some changes in his feelings. There's still irritation. There's also some compassion that's starting to build in. So using this skill, doing the opposite, instead of yelling at her, he decides to give her a hug. After all, isn't this what she was really saying? Was she really trying to tell him that she was exhausted, she's lonely, she's scared she's not doing a good enough job? She just wants reassurance. Maybe she just needs a hug. Take a second to think how his night is going to go differently if he does the opposite. Instead of yelling at her back, he gives her a hug. Next scenario is that Amy and her wife are in an argument. Amy's taken this class. She knows that she needs to take a time out. If she attempts to disengage and walk away, her wife pushes her in the back. Amy's thoughts are, she's not getting away with this. I'm going to teach her a lesson about putting hands on me, and I don't care what happens. Amy has a comfort with violence. In fact, she's been in abusive relationships before. She was physically abused as a child. And for her, somebody puts hands on her, it's like a reflex to respond back with violence. And what you see right here, I don't care what happens, means that in this moment, somebody put hands on her, especially to her back. She doesn't care about consequences. She doesn't care if she's going to go to jail. She doesn't care about work. She doesn't care about making chief. What she cares about is retribution, getting even, teaching somebody a lesson, protecting herself, making sure no one ever does that again. Her physical reactions are her adrenaline's pumping. She gets this tunnel vision where she can't think or see anything else except for what's in front of her and what she has to do. She's gritting her teeth, and here's where she catches it. Her hands are starting to clench up as she's getting ready to punch. Her feelings are shocked, fury, rage. Her instinctive reaction is to punch her hard, and to cause some damage. Now, let's say Amy's been through this class and she doesn't want to go down the same road, and she's able to catch herself. She caught it right back here when her fist started to clench up. She knew what that meant. And let's say she wants to do something different. She could give herself a couple of seconds just to think. And her thoughts start to shift to now there is no excuse for this. I don't want to see what she's going to do next, and I need to get away from her. Her physical reactions are her heart is beating fast, she's feeling shaky. Her feelings are shock and anger, and now this new emotion of sadness. The sadness is probably connected back to this thought that I need to get away from her. Her behavior, instead of engaging with her, instead of moving towards her, is to do the opposite. And that's to leave, to get into her car, drive to her friend's house, for a number of reasons. One, in there's safety. She needs to assess her safety, if she needs police, if this is an ongoing threat. But now comes the real hard part, which is she has to assess this situation. Maybe Amy and her wife have made agreements to stop using violence in the relationship. She's been holding up her end of the bargain, and her wife hasn't. She's going to have to make some hard decisions. That's where this sadness comes in. She's going to have to evaluate the relationship and also make a choice if this is something that she's going to stay in or get out. But doing the opposite. I'm sure we could imagine what would have happened back here if she were to not only punch her, but to punch her hard and to keep going. How might that have escalated? What might those long-term effects be for her? Instead, she disengages and leaves. One more. Talk about power and control. Paul's wife lets him know that she's going to go out to happy hour with a couple of her coworkers. And before she leaves, she comes out. She's dressed in what Paul would consider a pretty revealing shirt. Paul's thoughts are like, hell, you're going out like that. She wants to get hit on. And I'm putting a stop to this now. Here you see that power and control. He's going to put a stop to this now. He's going to use some form of power to make this not happen. I don't know if it's just the shirt or he doesn't like the idea of her going out to happy hour, but something he's going to do to stop this, regain control over the situation. His physical reactions are his face is getting hot. He's feeling physically agitated. His feelings are disrespected, threatened, jealous, hurt. He's working himself up to opening his mouth and telling his wife she looks like a whore. Let's say Paul has taken this class and he doesn't want to step out of the box. He doesn't want to engage in emotional abuse. And he catches this. He catches his thinking that he's going to put a stop to this right now. And he knows that that sounds an awful lot like power and control. Paul's going to start to do something different. Say he allows just a few seconds for that instinctive reaction to simmer down, some new thoughts to kick in, which is, I wish she would wear something else, but it's up to her. She does work hard to stay in shape, and I'm pretty lucky. His physical reactions, he's still a little agitated, but he's getting calmer. He's feeling frustrated. There's some understanding. And by doing the opposite, instead of degrading his wife, he's going to tell her that she looks beautiful and he can't wait till she gets home tonight. How do you think Paul's night went differently by doing the opposite? All right, those are our example scenarios. Let's see what you come up with. Let's go over these homework questions. The first question is, how would you recognize that you may need to use the do the opposite strategy? In other words, what warning signs would tell you that this is a situation where this skill would be useful? The second question is, give an example of the do the opposite strategy in a situation. Think of something realistic for you. What could come up and how could you try this strategy to get a different end result? The third question comes from the book